Good morning, and thank you for joining me with a six pack, the Scotty Six Pack, the only podcast that's bringing you the latest stories in Wisconsin sports every single day. And we do it in less time than it takes to complete your morning commute. I'm your host, Kedrick Stumbers, and you can follow me on Twitter. I guess it's called X now, at Kedrick Stumbers, and follow the podcast at Scotty Six Pack to get the latest updates in Wisconsin sports. If you're watching here on YouTube, or if you want to catch the podcast on YouTube, you can find us there by looking up Scotty Six Pack, smash the like button, the subscribe button, helps us grow, and helps us continue the conversation with other Wisconsin sports fans. So let's get into it. We got two segments today. One, we're going to hit on something that we have all been waiting for, the Green Bay Packers. Training camp is finally here. Veterans report to training camp today, and practices start tomorrow. And I got one thing that fans should be paying attention to, and one thing that fans should not be paying attention to out of training camp. After that, we're going to talk a little bit of Milwaukee Brewers baseball because a lot has happened, and that's what we spent the vast majority of the last show talking about. So one thing to pay attention to, training camp, the defensive line. This is, I think, in my opinion, the most underrated question mark on the Green Bay Packers roster for the 2023 season. And I kind of mean defensive line as, a catch-all. Defensive line, outside linebacker, edge, everything from run prevention to rushing the passer. And Packers lost two significant contributors on the defensive line in the offseason. Dean Lowry on the end goes to Minnesota in free agency, and Darren Reed, who spent more time playing up the middle, goes back to Seattle, where he started his career. In terms of roster additions, Packers brought on Colby Wooden, fourth-round pick out of Auburn, Carl Brooks, the sixth-round pick out of Bowling Green, who I think has a lot of upside, and he's played everywhere on the line. Like this guy, if you have heard any of the kind of listen to coverage with his position coaches, he seems to really get it. He seems to have it all together for a guy who went to a Bowling Green. Has played everywhere on the line, but profiles more on the edge. But again, because he went to Bowling Green, doesn't really have a track record of playing against elite competition to prepare him for the moment now. However, looked absolutely fantastic, really ate it up at the Senior Bowl. One thing to remember is that these are the big additions, and most rookies aren't great. Kenny Clark, the defensive tackle, wasn't great as a rookie. Rashawn Gary on the edge famously took a couple of seasons before he really broke out in 2021. Packers fans all over the place were ready to call Rashawn Gary a bust. Devontae Wyatt, a first-round pick, wasn't that good last season and really saw his snap counts go up and down on a defense that struggled to stop the run all year long. Ultimately, why this matters, that these are the additions while Dean Lowry and Jaron Reed are the subtractions. That the Packers lose a lot. They lose two starters on the defensive line and didn't bring in any proven players or do any more to replace it. So what's going to need to be the replacement? It's going to have to be some combination of guys already on this roster, guys who have been on this roster. TJ Slayton, who in his third year started 2 games last year, has gotten snaps in every game since he came into the league, but hasn't been asked to do a lot. He could be a rotational piece up the middle to help replace some of that production from Jaron Reed. Jonathan Ford or Chris Slayton, both former 7th-round picks that haven't seen game action yet. Chris Slayton looks more like a career fringe roster guy, career practice squad guy. Maybe the Packers see something out of training camp from him or Jonathan Ford that gives them reason to be hopeful. But the big elephant in the room has to be Devontae Wyatt. And in a way, the elephant in the room amidst this entire defensive line, amidst this entire defensive side of the ball conversation, has to be Joe Barry. Because Devontae Wyatt is an example of just how many high draft pick players, how much high draft pick talent with a high pedigree is on this defense between guys like Devontae Wyatt, Quay Walker, Eric Stokes, Sean Gary. It has to be an example of just how much Joe Barry needs to figure it out, because many of us have been asking the Joe Barry question, for multiple seasons now, even though he has barely had multiple seasons in Green Bay. So Devontae Wyatt saw his snap count wax and wane in 2022, ultimately finished with just 15 tackles, but 1.5 sacks. Like we mentioned, rookies aren't great. Kenny Clark improvement from year 1 to 2 was tremendous, as we mentioned. From year 1 to 2, year 1, Kenny Clark goes 0 sacks, 21 tackles, to 4.5 sacks and 55 tackles. So that's a jump of 4.5 more sacks and 34 more tackles in Kenny Clark's second year in the league, which is huge. Part of that is because he got more snaps, went from 2 starts in 16 games to 15 starts. And I think Devontae Wyatt is going to have to get a similar jump up in playing time, because I struggle to see, aside from TJ Slayton, who else is going to eat up those snaps up the middle of the defensive line. Notably for Kenny Clark, too, those 4.5 sacks and 55 tackles in his second year in the league are still both his second highest marks ever in a season. So I don't think we're going to see this big of a jump necessarily for Devontae Wyatt, but a modest jump still gets a lot of production up for Devontae Wyatt. If we want to look at kind of the guy he needs to replace, that's Jarran Reed, who had 52 tackles and 2.5 sacks last year. Jarran Reed, a multi-year veteran, we're going to not expect that much from Devontae Wyatt, I don't think, but some combination of Devontae Wyatt's production needs to come close to that ability from Jarran Reed, I think, particularly for this Packers defense that struggles so much to stop the run, struggled so much. And outside linebacker, we're going to move more from this tackle conversation to the edge. Packers don't lose anyone, except for Rashawn Gary for a few weeks at the beginning of the season, hopefully a few weeks, as he comes off the ACL injury. But this is still a big loss, obviously, losing Rashawn Gary. The defense overall, the pass rush in particular, was just nowhere near as productive with Rashawn Gary out of the lineup after suffering that ACL injury last year. According to ESPN Stats and Info, Packers' pressure rate fell from 40% to 32% with Rashawn Gary out of the lineup. That's huge. However, not losing anybody on the edge is huge. Rob Demovsky wrote a piece for ESPN going over every position group on the Packers roster, rating them better, worse, or the same. He said outside linebacker was worse. But he couched it by saying the Packers will be better when Gary returns from the torn ACL. However, it feels so disingenuous to me when your room returns everyone as a top 15 pick to then call that position group worse. And may I mention, the guy we have not mentioned in this conversation is Lucas Van Ness, the top 15 pick, who can legitimately play anywhere on the line. And given the amount of production where Rashawn Gary isn't going to be in the starting lineup week 1, and you lose a guy like Jarran Reed up the middle, you lose a guy like I am blanking so badly right now. You lose a guy like Dean Lowry on the edge as well. All that when you can have Lucas Van Ness line up over the middle, line up at 3 tech, line up at 5 tech on the edge. That's a big piece to get back. Frankly, might have to start the season all over the place at all of these places, kind of like he did at Iowa. He has the talent to do it, but like we mentioned, rookies usually have a really steep learning curve. But with other veterans on the roster, like Preston Smith, Justin Hollins, Kingsley Enagbare, Jonathan Garvin, there's enough there that this team should be able should be able to figure it out on the outside, to figure out how to get pressures. And if not, that just brings it back to the Joe Barry of it all. The smoke in the room for every conversation that Packers fans are going to have about this defense this season is going to be about Joe Barry. If the defense isn't doing well, Joe Barry's going to get a lot of the blame. Frankly, if the defense does do well, I'm not sure that fans are going to be ready to give Joe Barry credit for it. But they might have to, because there's a lot of talent here. Joe Barry hasn't shown that he can make it work before. Something changes. Joe Barry is maybe the guy there, unless Lucas Van Ness is an absolute game breaker cheat code, which, as we've said, rookies struggle their first season. So I have a hard time seeing that necessarily be the case. So my one big thing to ignore for the Green Bay Packers over training camp is Jordan Love. Okay, don't ignore Jordan Love, but ignore the hot takes. This isn't Jordan Love's first set of practices as QB1 for the Green Bay Packers. And I know that sounds weird to say. It sounds weird overall because, Kendrick, what are you talking about? Aaron Rodgers has been the starting quarterback on this Green Bay Packers team for nearly 1.5 decades. How on earth is this not the first practices of Jordan Love as QB1 for the Green Bay Packers? And it's because, frankly, Jordan Love has spent a lot of time in practices role-playing the starting quarterback for the Green Bay Packers. He spent a lot of time leading up to 2022 as the starting quarterback when Rodgers skipped OTAs. Rodgers also spent a lot of weeks over the past couple of seasons not practicing during the week as he recovered from various injuries. A lot of noise was made about Aaron Rodgers not practicing during the week, during the season, because he needed to rest his body. And somebody has to be taking starting quarterback snaps in practice, installing the game plan for everybody else on the roster. The world does not stop when Aaron Rodgers is not there for it to revolve around it. Jordan Love was there, throwing the passes, developing relationships with the guys on the roster, with the defense, with the offensive line. I would say the receivers, but basically none of those guys are there anymore. What we need to see from Jordan Love is, and this is a warning for pretty much everybody on the roster, but especially Jordan Love, because that's where all the clickbait is going to be, quite frankly, is that the highs aren't actually that high coming out of training camp. And the lows aren't actually that low. There's going to be roster decisions made for, some of these guys. Most of these roster spots are probably already decided, but overall, we're going to see some guys, and then we're going to get a better look at them during the season too. And that's what we need to see from Jordan Love. After spending all offseason dissecting every single throw that Jordan Love made in Kansas City and against Philadelphia, what we need is to see more of that in real game time, because Matt LaFleur and Jordan Love are going to be installing an offense and building chemistry with wide receivers and tight ends who are all very, very, very young. And that's another reason to ignore the Jordan Love drama coming out of training camp. Because who knows what this pass catcher situation is really going to be like. That, if you want to pay attention to the Jordan Love of it all, pay attention to what's going on with the wide receivers, with the tight ends. I think it's going to be hard as, casual onlookers to get a solid understanding of, are tight ends actually holding up in pass protection? Are they remembering routes and pass protection? All of that. Are the wide receivers running the right route tree? If receivers aren't making a play on the ball, is it because Jordan Love is trying to test them, try to throw the ball out there and see what the receivers can do? Or is someone like Luke Musgrave missing a block? It's going to be hard for us to tell that outside of real game action, where in practice the play might get blown dead and it might be unclear why. Overall, receivers, tight ends, get to work. Need to get to work along with Jordan Love. But frankly, I am far more interested in what we're going to see and learn on the defensive side of the ball than what we will learn on offense during practices this upcoming week. If you don't want to go to practices, if you want to go to games, I highly recommend heading over to TickPick, which is where I get all of my tickets on TickPick. That's TickPick. This isn't an ad. TickPick is just a service I love, and I want you to save money on your next ticket purchase. So when you use TickPick, you will never pay service or delivery fees like you will on other ticket selling apps, and it comes with a best price guarantee. If you find a better price somewhere else for the same ticket, TickPick will refund you twice the difference in credit toward your next purchase. Plus, if you use my link in the show description, you'll save $10 on your first order. $10 on your first order. That's enough to buy like terrace level tickets at some Brewers games. Great deal. Definitely enough to buy 400 level tickets at darn near every Brewers game. So go to the Apple App Store, go to the Google Play Store, just type in the dang site into your browser. Download the TickPick app, that's TickPick, and use my link in the podcast description. Save $10 on your first order. Never pay service fees for tickets ever again. So moving back to sports and what's going on. Let's talk about the Milwaukee Brewers. Because, oh my goodness, this team is so much fun. And Brewers just keep winning. This has been, man, the baseball season is so long. And, I grew up playing hockey and grew up a large NHL fan, right? We've, as Wisconsinites, grown to become more invested in the day-to-day of the NBA regular season with Giannis and the Milwaukee Bucks as real title contenders for the first time in 50 years. And so even that feels so brief compared to the never-ending Major League Baseball regular season, because it feels so long ago that the Brewers were on an absolute hot streak to start the year, and then were down for so long, just couldn't figure out how to hit the ball, couldn't figure out how to do anything. And now they're on an upswing again. And on the show, I talked right at the end of the All-Star break about what was coming up for the Milwaukee Brewers. And then the Brewers swept the Reds in Cincinnati, took 2 out of 3 from Philadelphia, and then took 1 out of 3 from Atlanta, but were legitimately in every game against a very, very good Braves team, although they're slumping a little bit right now, but a very good Braves team that Milwaukee was in all 3 games against, had a shot to win all 3 of those games. And last night, Milwaukee beat the Reds again in the first of the last 3 games Milwaukee's going to play against Cincinnati this year, against their opponent for the division. And the Reds had won 5 straight coming into last night. I was going to record this earlier, but frankly got engrossed with this Milwaukee Brewers game because it was a blast to watch. And Brewers win it with Christian Yelich's first walk-off hit since 2019. Since 2019, mind you, which was his last MVP caliber season, further escalating the Christian Yelich is back-o-meter. Sal Frelick gets called up over the weekend, goes 3 for 3 in his debut. He has 2 outstanding catches in 1 inning during that game. And last night, it's his first major league home run to tie up the game against the Reds. I know we're coming up on fun stuff in the sports calendar. Packers have training camp. and we're going to get into the preseason, and it's going to be the NFL regular season before we know it. Even before that, Wisconsin Badgers football camp and the start of a new era in Madison under head coach Luke Fickell and offensive coordinator Phil Longo running the air raid. Don't forget about the Brewers. They could just keep getting better. Really, I mean, I know they're hot right now, and yeah, they'll cool down a little bit, but the Brewers could just keep getting better to maintain something that looks like this tear that they are currently on. Brewers have a 1.5 game lead in the division now, and as of today, would have the top wild card spot with their current record, which is not something I think most of us assumed would be realistic for a team coming out of the NL Central, a month ago. Brandon Woodruff, who's been out since the very beginning of the year, since April, did one rehab start with the Timber Rattlers over the weekend. He'll do one more on Thursday, and then he may do one at AAA in Nashville before coming back into the rotation, which also, to note, I was in Nashville up until Saturday, and now apparently, Brandon Woodruff's going to end up going there. And I could have been in Appleton this past week to go to either of these rehab starts for Woodruff at the Timber Rattlers as well, but last minute made plans to come here to somewhere in the middle of Texas. I'm like just barely missing these minor league rehab starts for Brandon Woodruff. However, I will say my last Nashville Sounds game in the 2 weeks I was in Nashville was Sal Frelick's, although I didn't know it at the time, last day in Nashville before he got the call up to Milwaukee. So very neat. He didn't actually have a very good night that day, but I went to another game where he reached base on 4 straight plate appearances or something ridiculous because Sal Frelick is fun to watch. So Brandon Woodruff could be coming back, just making his Brewers team better. Brewers also don't have their starting first baseman right now. Rabbit Tellez, who had a maybe fake injury right before the All-Star break, then suffered a real injury when he cut his hand on the fence at Great American Ballpark in Cincinnati. So now he's out for a little while. Hopefully we'll be back in a week or so. But the Brewers are hopefully going to get some real roster help back soon to improve them on the margins a little bit. Milwaukee, as they usually do, will likely make a minor move at the deadline, acquire a reliever, help to shuttle bodies between AAA and big league club just to keep arms fresh. So Brewers have to get through the series against Cincinnati and then return trip to Atlanta. Then the Brewers play three-game series in a row against Washington Nationals, Pittsburgh Pirates, and the Colorado Rockies. That's the start of August for the Brewers, is the Nationals, Pirates, and Rockies, who have the 3 worst records in the National League. After that, the Brewers play the White Sox, which are only better than the Royals and the A's in the American League, but Kansas City and Oakland are having historically tremendously awful seasons. So as soon as the Brewers get through this slog between Cincinnati and Atlanta, they're going to go on to play 12 games against, 4 of the worst teams in baseball. Could be a great run, particularly that first half of August, to help the Brewers, hopefully grow this lead they have on Cincinnati. As, right now, they have a 1.5 game lead, headed into game 2, the penultimate game of the season against the Cincinnati Reds, the second place team in the division. I always feel wary of getting optimistic about the Brewers. And I'm not saying this is a World Series contending team because they don't have enough offense to do it. And pitching is just a little too shaky this year. But right now, I just can't help getting optimistic. Hopefully seeing this team, win a wild card series, get to the DS, and maybe get lucky. Right? Brewers 7-3 record out of the All-Star break. It's best in the NL, tied with the Dodgers. Who knows? Could be a fun August, September to be a Brewers fan if you care to pay just a little bit of attention and maybe care to, buy a ticket on TickPick. Get your way to a Brewers game. It'll be good for you. I promise. And if you're going, hit me up on Twitter at Kendrick Stumbris, at Scotty Sixpack. Let me know. Would love to link up, and I'll buy you a drink as long as you bought your tickets on TickPick. But that is it for today's edition of the Scotty Sixpack. Follow us on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts to start every day with everything you need to know in Wisconsin sports. While you're there, while you're on Spotify, while you're on Apple, while you're here on YouTube, like the stream, leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. If you got a review, leave a kind comment. Tell some folks what you like about the show. Help us grow the show and allow us to make even better content for all of you. Will allow us to keep the conversation going with Wisconsin sports fans. Thanks again for listening. I've been your host, Kendrick Stumbris. I'm Wisconsin.